Morning, everybody. My name is Manus Carey. I'm Deputy Principal at the RNCM. Very, very warm welcome, firstly. Thank you for joining me so early in the morning. Just before we get started, what I'd like to do, I'm just going to be slightly pausing, by the way, just initially, because I'm letting a few extra people in, but just a couple of things I wanted to say, a couple of kind of housekeeping things before we get started. We are going to be recording this. So we're going to be uploading this to the web afterwards and for our archive. So if you'd like to, I think everybody it looks has their camera off, but if you could try and keep your microphone off as well so we don't have any sound swirling around. But of course, please have your camera on as well if you would like. So we are going to be, as I say, recording this, and we're going to be putting it online. And if you'd like to be an active participant, obviously, please do turn on your camera as well. And what I'd like to do, we have until about 10 o'clock, and this is very much a session for all of you to ask questions for me. And so if you'd like to ask a question, if you could just raise the hand button. And then what I'll do is I'll bring you in to ask your question. I've got a number of screens, so it may take a minute or two to do that. But otherwise, if you'd like to just put a note as well in the chat, and I can come to your question. So whichever you prefer. If you prefer not to speak, if you prefer just to put a question in the chat, and I'll try and answer that. I'm just going to pause for 1 second. I've got to let in a few other people. And if I could, just to start off actually, because obviously I can't see or hear anybody, but I just want to double check I'm not talking into empty space. Could you give me a thumbs up, everybody, if you can actually hear me? Fantastic. Okay, good. Fantastic. I'm just letting in a few more people now. Great. So good morning again, everybody. I've just let in a few other people. Just to reiterate very quickly, if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand or put something in the chat, and I will come to it. What I'd like to do is just talk for a couple of minutes, and as I say, this is very much an opportunity for all of you to ask me questions, so I don't want to just sit talking at you. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit very briefly about some of the performance and professional opportunities that we have at the RNCM. And firstly, can I just ask, so I know, can you let me know how many of you have actually been in the building of the RNCM? I'm just quite interested. If you could raise your hand if you have been in the building. Great, so a few of you have. Fantastic. Well, what I'd like to do, just very briefly say something about the building first. What I'd encourage you to do, if you haven't already, is to go onto our website. We've got loads of videos of performances that have taken place online, and it can give you a sense of not only what we do, but also if you want to get a sense of what facilities we have. We run about 500, 550 performances every year. So we have a very, very busy program. And this is a mixture of student activity, of professional activity, of hires that we bring into the building. And it's a real mix of all types of music across classical, contemporary, jazz, pop. So huge range. And we have, just to tell you a little bit firstly about our building, we have a 500-seat concert hall, which is kind of the heart of most of our performance activity. We have a theatre with a pit, which is fantastic for doing things like opera, for things where we have a group of musicians in the pit and something happening on stage. And we've got a 100-seat recital room. And then we have also 8 large rehearsal studios. And one of these is fully kitted out for pop students, which is state of the art. It's an amazing space. And then we're also in the middle of converting another one with this amazing system, which is called the Maya Constellation, which it's a studio space. And basically once it's finished in the next few months, you'll be able to go into it, and with the technology, you can recreate any acoustic of any concert or building around the world. And also it'll be amazingly kitted out for recording and fantastic for composers or performers who want to do things that might be slightly different to the normal spaces. I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about some of the groups we have as well. So across all our student range, we've got symphony orchestra that meets a number of times a year. We've got chamber orchestra. We've got an opera orchestra that works together twice a year as well. And we have a brand new orchestra. So if any composers there, every composer who comes to the RNCM has an opportunity to have orchestral music performed publicly through our brand new orchestra. We've a hugely renowned brass band, jazz big band, and one of the most popular groups we have actually as well is our session orchestra, which is this amazing 40-piece group, which is where we bring our classical students and our pop students together a number of times a year to do a big celebratory concert. We've got loads of other smaller groups, like we've got Baroque groups, we've got this fantastic group called the Arc Ensemble, which is basically a wind ensemble. It's called Arc because there's two of everything, and they come together and they perform in a very contemporary way, very diverse range of music. They generally do lots of movement and lots of quite cool things like that. We have the sort of core of our program that we put on. We run about 12 festivals a year, so really busy. They tend to be day long or weekend long, and each of our festivals focuses on a different instrument group in college. So we have, for example, we have a piano festival, we have a strings festival, we have a couple of new music festivals, we have a chamber music festival, and these festivals are a great opportunity for our students to perform to a public, but also one of the things we really work on is bringing in industry professionals, top class performers around the world, and we embed them right inside those festivals. So it's a great opportunity to perform with musicians who are out in the profession, but also to perform alongside them. So for example, for any string players out there, for our string festival, every year we either invite in the Halle Orchestra or the BBC Phil, and we do a big side-by-side as a celebration as part of that. And it's an amazing opportunity just to get to play in that professional context. If you're a singer, just to tell you a little bit about opera, we do 2 fully staged operas every year. And again, those we bring in a professional conductor, a professional director, and they spend many weeks working towards performances that take place in our theatre. And also singers get to do a lot of opera excerpt performances as well alongside those operas. I wanted to, I'd like to bring in some of you with questions now, but just one other thing I wanted to say about the kind of approach we take with our program. There's 2 things I want to mention, which I think are very particular to the RNCM. One is that we think a lot about how we can allow our students' creativity to come forward in the program. So as well as us creating programs for our students to perform in, we're increasingly trying to find spots for students to do their own thing, to create their own, to curate their own projects, to put together their own projects from scratch. So for example, we have spotlight concerts where we essentially hand everything over to students to create their own program, and they run them. We recently started a lab week, which has turned out to work very well, which basically we hand over spaces to students for a week, and you apply to do a project that is created from scratch. And the only criteria essentially is we encourage students to go right to the edge of something new, to try something new. And it doesn't even need to be a finished project. It could be just to try something, to share it at the end of the week. And that's been extraordinarily popular, just to have an opportunity to do something in that way with our students. The other thing I just wanted to mention was a really core part of what we do is side-by-side performances. And again, we found students have responded so well to this idea where we'll have an orchestra or our session orchestra or a smaller group, and we will bring in professional musicians either to sit within the group or to lead it, to direct it. And that this idea of kind of absorbing musicality by being among other great performances is a really fantastic way to learn, but it's also really, really fun for those who are involved in that. I'm just looking through some questions that have come in. I'm just going to pause a little bit to read some of these. Sorry, just scroll back. Got loads of questions coming in. So one of the questions is, can you be in the orchestras if you're studying composition? Yes, very much so. So the performance program is, as I say, it's incredibly diverse, and we've had composers performing in orchestras, we've had composers performing in other things as well. So that's very much possible. I'm just scrolling. We've had quite a few. So I'm just going to pick out a few of these. So, can pop students take part in classical projects? Yes, very much so. I mean, one of the things, so for those of you who don't know, we have our BMUS, which is primarily for classical players, and our BMUS Pop for pop players. And within that, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do as musicians. So for instance, we have opportunities for classical musicians to get involved in jazz projects and improvisation projects. A lot of our pop students are jazz players as well, or improvisers. And there are certain groups where those musicians come together. For example, our big band is one example which regularly has students that are classically trained or pop. Our session orchestra as well. And what we're finding increasingly actually is that students just want to come together and create their own projects that aren't necessarily part of formal groups that we put on. I'm going to just pick another few questions. So what I'd say is, because I have a lot of questions coming in, if there are specific instrument questions, what I'll try and answer some of them, but I'd encourage you to ask those later on, because you'll be able to join specific school sessions with the head of school, who'll be able to tell you in quite a lot of detail about things like practice time and around the number of spaces available. So one of the questions coming in, what sort of opportunities are available for pop students to play in professional opportunities outside the RNCM? So pop students, a huge amount of, as I mentioned already, some of the opportunities in the building for with our session orchestra and things like that. A huge amount of the opportunities for pop students are external, actually, performing in all the main venues around Manchester. And also there's often quite a lot of opportunities to go further afield as well, which Andy, who heads our pop school, is constantly arranging for professional opportunities. So there's a huge amount of things that you can get involved in outside the building as well as inside the building. Choirs, somebody's asking about choral opportunities. So we have a couple of choirs. So if you join as a first year, all our first years join symphony chorus. And I think that's a really great opportunity for every first year to do some kind of performance together. So whether you're a singer or not, everybody joins the symphony chorus. And it's run by Stuart Overington, who's a really fantastic director, and they do a number of projects then that they do in front of a public audience. We also have chamber choir as well, and this is a slightly smaller group that you audition to be part of. And again, there's a number of projects throughout the year. We've had a couple of really exciting projects we've had for chamber choir. Actually, we did one in we did a project in Victoria Baths where we took the choir out and we staged this whole performance last year, which was really fantastic to a packed out audience. We also brought our chamber choir to Bergen in Norway, where we've got a relationship with a choir called the Edvard Grieg Choir. And they went and they spent the guts of a week in Norway, and they worked with this choir, and then they performed with the Bergen Philharmonic. We've also had some really exciting opportunities for the choir to perform, for example, with the Halle, going down to sing at proms with the Halle and then the other London venues. So the choir gets a lot of really exciting opportunities as well. So I'm going to just pick out some of I've got a lot of questions lined up here. I want to pick out some of the ones that are specifically related to performance or professional opportunities initially, because throughout the day there's going to be opportunities to talk in a little more detail about your instrument. I'm just, if you can give me 1 second, I'm scrolling through. So someone's asking about musical theatre pit orchestra opportunities. So we do a lot of different types of projects in using our pits. As I mentioned, we do opera, but we also have a young company that we run, and they do a number of projects throughout the year, and they generally are very much focused on musical theatre. And they're a group of about 16 to 19-year-olds, and they work on a project over a number of months, and then RNCM students take part both in the training of those students, they take part in the performances, and they also very often form the pit orchestra that play alongside them, and they would perform a project sort of 3 or 4 times in the RNCM theatre. Just pick So someone's asking a very important question around coronavirus. So I'll just read out the question. If the coronavirus crisis continues into next year, will the conservatoire open and continue online? So next year, I assume you mean this autumn. But so at the moment, we're very much planning to open this autumn and into next year as well. We're just in the process of working out what that term will look like, but we're going to have activity in the building, and we're going to have certain activity online. So it's going to very much be a blended term with key activity taking place on site. So that'll be very different depending on what area of college you're in, but we realize it's very important for example, on an individual basis, for pianists to have access to pianos, for percussionists to have access to instruments, to have face-to-face contact with your tutors. We've got some exciting plans around digital projects that we're going to be doing for performances. So in a nutshell, we are very much going to be going ahead this autumn. Albeit it'll look slightly different to a normal year, but I think it'll still be a very exciting autumn that we're planning. So someone's asking about do you have to have a grade 8? So what we say for audition is that you need to be in or around grade 8 level in order to apply. So it doesn't necessarily mean you absolutely have to have grade 8, but you need to be at that level. Someone else is asking, Abby is asking about, oh, sorry, your question's disappeared. So Abby's asking about professional experience schemes. So I'm just letting in a few other people. So I'll tell you a little bit about professional experience schemes, because they're an absolutely central part of what we do. And I think there's 3 things I'd like to mention. So firstly, our professional experience schemes, we work with about 14 or 15 professional groups at the moment. For professional experience schemes, and that's very much to give an opportunity for our students to have experience of sitting within a professional group, whether that's an orchestra, whether that's a brass band, whether that's a chamber group. And give you an example of some of the ensembles we work with locally. So we work very closely with the Halle, the BBC Phil, Manchester Camerata. We work with Liverpool Phil, Opera North, Black Dyke Band, Northern Symphonia. So we've got a huge collection of orchestras. We work internationally as well with the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, Netherlands Wind Ensemble, where every year a couple of our students get to play in their famous New Year's Eve concert, which takes place in the Netherlands. I mentioned already the Edvard Grieg Corps. So as I say, we have about 14 or 15 groups, and you audition to take part in projects with them, and then they take place throughout the year alongside all the activity that you do. The other thing about those groups is as well, like I mentioned earlier, is we regularly invite those players to come in and sit alongside our projects. So for example, we invited players from the Chamber Orchestra of Europe to come in, and we did a fantastic classical project with them, leading and sitting within the orchestra. The other two things I just wanted to mention from answering some of the professional questions, we every year we provide about 400 or so paid professional engagement opportunities. And these are amazing opportunities for students to get out of our building and to play in music clubs or to play at other engagements around the country, and also to get a bit of money, which is quite a good thing to have. But also it's just a great experience to get the experience of being outside the building and playing in front of a different type of audience. Later on, if you join my colleagues who will tell you a little bit more detail about the actual degree structure and what you can do within whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate, they'll mention a little bit as well about the creative professional practice opportunities. So every third year in the BMAs gets to do a placement, which is out in the industry, and this can be across a whole wide range of different things around. It can be community education, it can be arts administration management, marketing, concert management, a huge range of the sort of broader skills that you need as a musician. So recording, for example, and this also gives you an insight into some of the things that you might want to go into. You know, perhaps you don't want to develop a career just as a performer, but you might want to go into more community work, recording management, that kind of thing. And then in your fourth year on the BMAs, you get to do an independent project as well. Or if you're on the pop course, you get to do a industry placement and get professional experience. So you'll be able, if you're particularly interested in those sides of things, you can ask our heads of school and heads of program a little bit more detail later on, because they'll be able to talk a bit more about that. I'm just going to pause for a second to just look through some of the questions. So somebody's asking, are there opportunities for pianists in professional experience schemes? So because of the nature of piano, obviously, we do have chamber music, but there's less work on a lot for the larger scale groups. But there are a lot of opportunities that are working with professionals. So for example, every year we run a piano day, and the last piano day we had was very much based around collaborative piano playing, and we had some really top class piano players like Kathy Stott, Jeanne Flambe-Vouze, who's our international chair, and it was very much an opportunity for our students to play alongside those really fantastic players. So there's also a lot of opportunities come up for our students to do concerto slots with orchestras, and to get other professional opportunities outside the building as well. So there is a huge amount that pianists can get involved in. I'm just reading through some of these questions. So someone's asking again, I'll just pick up again. I'm going to focus mainly on questions around, like I say, around performance and professional experience, because a lot of the curriculum questions will be, I can touch on some of them, but they can be picked up a little bit more with my colleagues about the program later on. So someone's asking about professional experience for composers. So we have a huge amount of experience. I mean, contemporary music is very much a central part of what we do. We have a very strong relationship, for those of you who might know the group Safa, which is a contemporary group in Manchester. We have a very strong relationship with them. There's opportunities to have your music performed. Like I mentioned, we run 2 or 3 festivals of contemporary music every year. And we work very closely with the BBC Philharmonic on those, with Safa. We work closely with groups like Manchester Collective as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a brand new orchestra, which is made up of our students. And that's an opportunity for every composer who joins the RNCM to get an orchestral piece performed, I think, which is a great experience, because obviously writing for that scale is quite challenging. And they're always performed in front of an audience as well. There's and just to add as well, there's huge opportunities within all those festivals. We invite big name composers to come and we perform their music. They do masterclasses, workshops. So we've had recently, for example, we've had Mark Anthony Turnage, we've had fantastic composer Erlen Wallen. We've had Anders Hilborg, who's our international chair. So there's constantly composers who are doing great things out in the profession who come, and they'll come and teach, they'll come and play their music, and there's opportunity to mingle with them as well. So there's a question I'd like just to take from Blaise about vocal students and about opera. Do students have the opportunity to work professional opera companies? So firstly, just to say, we have 2 fully staged operas we run every year. And these tend to be a mix. There's a question of are these classical or contemporary? So it very much depends. We were, just before we went into lockdown, we had performances planned of Jonathan Dove's Mansfield Park, which obviously was written relatively recently. In the autumn, we're planning the Janacek's Cunning Little Vixen. We've had some Baroque operas, so it tends to range across a whole range of different styles. Just letting in some more people. There's a lot of opportunities as well for singers to get involved with activity outside. I've mentioned some of the choral opportunities, but a lot of our singers as well go in the 3rd term, they tend to go out and take part in professional opportunities. We constantly have opportunities coming up to sing with the local orchestras, for example. And there's a huge amount of opportunities that come up outside the building, as well as what we put on within the building in terms of the choral concerts, the vocal concerts. We have a day of song as well, which is very much focused on the smaller scale, not operatic, but smaller scale song. And we've had people like Roderick Williams coming to perform as part of that and work with students in master classes. I'm just going to pause for a second and have a look through some of the questions here. So Elodie has asked, how many performance opportunities are there for musicians around the city? So, I mean, in a nutshell, I'd say that there's a lot, and that would depend very much on what your area is. So we have, in terms of our formal performance program, we have a number of things that we program around about the city. So we're constantly looking for interesting spaces to do things in. So like I mentioned earlier, Victoria Baths, we go to MMU, we use other spaces around. We do a big end of year performance in the Bridgewater Hall every year, which is really fantastic. We get as many students on stage as we possibly can. for pop students, a lot of what they do is out and around the city, because the nature of the kind of venues that they want to play in are often smaller, more intimate kind of spaces outside the building. Like I mentioned earlier, there's huge opportunities through our relationships with the local orchestras, also through professional engagements that we put on as well, that very much take place around the city and out and about the Northwest. We've also actually, I should mention, we do quite a bit of international travel with our students. So one of the most exciting things we do every year, we have a residency in Montepulciano in Italy, which is an amazing experience for orchestral players. We bring a symphony orchestra there every year, and they take up residence for about 2.5 weeks, and it's an amazingly intense 2.5 weeks. There's 3 big orchestral projects, lots of chamber music, and for those of you who've been on summer courses, you'll know what that feels like, and it's an incredible experience. We've brought our big band to China, our percussion group to China. Like I mentioned, our vocal students have gone a couple of times to Bergen as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to go and perform elsewhere, but also perform with groups in other countries, which I think is a really important part of learning to be a performer. I've answered touring opportunity. So Connor is asking about how much scope is there for conducting ensembles. So I don't know if Connor's a conductor actually, or if you're asking as an instrumentalist, but I'll answer that in 2 ways. So we have about 12 student conductors every year, and we have 2 junior fellow conductors, and then the rest are master's conductors, and they as part of their program, they work quite a lot with our student groups. So they have opportunities to conduct all the range of groups that I mentioned at the beginning. And it's a huge important part for us, to that relationship that's built between conductors and student ensembles, because ultimately when you leave the RNCM and go out into the profession, those relationships that you build are the ones that you will keep for the rest of your life. If you're not a conducting student, but you're an instrumentalist, or you're studying something else, there are opportunities as well within your degree course to take conducting as part of that while you're at the RNCM as well. Lots of questions coming in. I want to take a question from George. Oh, it's just disappeared. Is it possible for students studying pop music to take part in jazz groups, particularly the big band? Very much so, yes. Like I mentioned a minute ago, one of the things we really encourage is for students doing studying the 2 different BMOS pop, to intermingle and to play together. We recently appointed a really fantastic musician, Steve Berry, as head of jazz and improvisation. And the reason for that is because we, as you probably know, if you've checked out the RNCM syllabus, we don't run a jazz degree or a specific jazz course as such. And one of the things we really want to encourage our students is to come, and if they have a particular interest in a certain area of music making, so whether that's jazz or improvisation, or if they're interested in early music, there's an opportunity to do that as part of your course, and to develop those very broad skills so you can kind of move in different directions and take part in different projects. And so we very much encourage, pop students who play a lot of jazz to take part in big band, and very much to mingle with the classical students as well. So I want to take a question from Abby, who's asked, are orchestra ensemble places auditioned or chosen by the heads of department? So there's 2 answers to that, really. Some of our projects are auditioned. So some of the I guess the more prestigious ones, like some of the symphony orchestra projects, and they would be auditioned by a panel. And what we very much are aware of, and we try to make sure that the projects are as fair and as open as possible and are very much based on merit for those. We also have a really fantastic orchestra and ensembles department who are very much involved in the planning of all the, because like I mentioned, we have 400 or 500 projects a year, so it's very, very busy. They work very closely with the schools of study to place students in the projects that aren't auditioned. So some of our projects are auditioned, the bigger ones. Some of them students are just placed in them, and that's very much based on the knowledge of where those students are at, what their interests are, what abilities they have, what interests, like I say, what interests they have. So, for example, if it's big band, if they feel, we know that they'll feel comfortable in an improvisation environment, or you know, if we have a Baroque orchestra, for example. We'll want to know that the students have had access to classes with Roger in terms of learning Baroque style and all that kind of thing. So it's very much a balance between some projects being auditioned, some projects are worked with our orchestra ensembles department. And that's very much to give us a sense of sharing the opportunities across all our students as well. I'm just going to pause again for a second just to look through some of these questions. So Jose, I think it's Jose, is asking for what opportunities for saxophonists to participate in symphony orchestra. Very, very much so. Again, this obviously would depend on what repertoire we do. We are quite, in our larger projects, we have a huge range of repertoire that we put on. Like I say, we do a lot of 20th century, 21st century repertoire as well as older repertoire, which would often by nature have saxophones in it. So we very much think about when we're putting together projects, we're very aware of the ecology of what instruments we have in college as well, so that we can give as many opportunities to different instrument groups, and particularly instruments who mightn't appear as often as maybe a string player, a saxophone mightn't appear as often. And we very much think about that when we're programming as well, so that we can get as many students performing and opportunities on stage. We also have, in terms specifically to answer the saxophone question, we have one of our festivals is a saxophone day. And that's very much an opportunity for that instrument to be involved in a whole range of different performances and working alongside professionals as well. I'm just pausing just to scroll through a few more questions here. There's some of these have been answered already, so I won't repeat the answers. I think I've answered about choir opportunities. Students in what is that? So there's a question here about how often and in which venues does the symphony orchestra play? So this is from Alexandra. So our symphony orchestra, generally we have, for our main symphony orchestra, perform together about 4 times a year. And for these projects, we'll bring in top conductors. To give you an example, we're conductors like Mark Elder, who we know from the Halle, who's due to come in. So they're always with top international conductors. Sometimes as well we bring top international soloists in. For example, in the Strings Festival, there's some really top soloists that come into play with our orchestras. Generally, we try to give opportunities to concertos as well to students, because it's a great thing, obviously, to give them those opportunities. So the symphony orchestra will, most of the time, will perform in our concert hall. And if you go online, actually, if you want to get a sense of what that looks like, there's quite a bit of footage online, and you can see the symphony orchestra in action. And once a year, then we tend to go to the Bridgewater Hall. So that tends to be our big celebratory end of year concert that we want to go into, a really massively big hall. I don't know if everybody knows the Bridgewater Hall, but it's a 2,200 seater hall, and it's an amazing acoustic, and it's an amazing experience. And we like to go there with something big and exciting that we can have as I say, a celebratory end of year. We also from time to time bring the symphony orchestra to other places. So we recently did a really exciting project where we brought our symphony orchestra to London to perform in London, and then we performed in Paris as well. And that was part of a big side-by-side project we did with the Paris Conservatoire, where we did 3 big symphonic programs and lots of other activity around as well. So we try as much as possible to find quite exciting venues for our orchestras and indeed our other groups as well to perform. So our brass band, for example, tours around quite a bit and goes down to London, goes to other places, as do the other groups I mentioned as well. So scrolling down. So someone's asking about solo group opportunities, specifically for tuba players. Yeah. So I mean, I guess I'd answer in a similar way for maybe other instruments like double bass, etc. So one of the things we very much focus on in our festivals, so if you're talking about tuba players, for our wind brass, we have a wind brass percussion festival. We also have a brass band festival as well, actually. And we very much look to give as much opportunities on stage for small groups and for where possible solo players as well. And we really focus in those festivals on those instruments. So in the strings festival, opportunities for double basses, for example, to play, and wind brass percussion festival, opportunities for other instruments that maybe mightn't ordinarily get a look in or as much as an opportunity on stage, you know, in the bigger projects. There's also, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of opportunities through our spotlight concerts, which are very much student-led. There's a lot of every Monday we have a series that takes place, a public series that is for smaller scale activities. So that's for either solo players or for small groups. Thursday lunchtime tends then to be bigger groups, to be orchestras or bigger ensembles. So there's a huge amount of opportunity throughout the year for all different instrument groups to put forward ideas. And increasingly, actually, we're very much trying to draw our students in to help create the program. And in fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with about 20 students to talk about the autumn and to talk about how we can embed our students' ideas, our thoughts even more into the program than we already do. So we're constantly looking for ideas from different instrument groups, etc., to embed into the program. We're very open to developing that. There's a question I wanted to, I've lost it now. I can't find the question, but there's a question somebody brought in about students with disabilities, which I'd like to answer. So we have a huge range of students at the RNCM. We have students who have different disabilities. And I think because of the diversity of our program, I think one of the things we're very proud of, that we are able to provide opportunities for a huge range of different, not only different instrument groups, but different styles of music making, different ways of performing. We're increasingly, as I mentioned a minute ago, we increasingly want to find ways to to allow to tell the story of all our students and allow them to create their own projects as well. So I think our performance programs, it's very much not a kind of set group of parameters that we try to fit everything in, but we're constantly rethinking it. We're constantly working with students on an individual basis to create different types of projects, new types of projects, different ways of communicating. And one of the things I'm very conscious of in terms of overseeing the program is that we have an enormously wonderful array of music going back hundreds of years. And we very much think about how we balance that and the style of music making that comes with that, with then also being in 2020 and playing the music of today. And that's not only the actual music, but it's the way the music is played, the way we put together our projects. And so we're constantly looking for different ways to do that. So whether that's bringing in, we've been working on, we had one of the most moving projects for me that we did was with a group, some of you may be aware of a group called Streetwise Opera, which is basically a group made up of homeless people. And they came in and did this wonderful project with our musicians last year, which was extraordinarily beautiful, but also extraordinarily moving. We're constantly finding ways to work as well with musicians who are disabled or who have different ways of working. So it's a really, really important part for us that to explore a hugely wide range of music making, as well as I mentioned Steve Berry earlier, who's our head of improvisation and jazz. And increasingly we're looking to do projects as well, which are about creating the project from scratch and embedding improvisation much more centrally in terms of the creation of those projects. And I think we found from the feedback we've got from students as well, that opportunity to not only focus on interpretation, which is obviously a key part of what we do, but also to have opportunities to create new stuff and really, really embed your own personality as a musician into what we do on stage, we think is a really important part of what we do. Just a small question I'm picking up from Izzy, who's asking, do we accept flutes into jazz ensembles? Yes, very much so. I think we, if any of you caught our lunchtime jazz collective that we released yesterday on Facebook, you'll see the instruments involved in that. If you haven't seen it, if you go onto our RNCM Facebook, it's really fantastic, and I encourage you to watch it as well. And it'll give you, it'll give you a sense of the kind of projects that we work on, but that has flute in it as well. I'm going to primarily, just to say again, I'm going to primarily just focus on pulling out some questions about performance at the moment and professional opportunities, because there's various detailed questions about specific instruments and courses that you'll be able to have the opportunity to talk to our heads of school a little later, and they'll be able to go into instrument specific detail, because I know we've got a broad range of instruments here. So I think if I could encourage you to ask those questions a little bit later on to heads of school. So Dan Pearson is asking about masterclasses. So I don't know what particular instrument you play, obviously, but we have across the sort of core part of the training, if you like, obviously will be your one-to-one with your tutor, that relationship. And then depending on the instrument, you'll have instrumental classes around that. And then we always, every term across every instrument, across vocal, across pop as well, we have masterclasses, so we have international names that come in on a regular basis. So that kind of works differently, again, depending on which school of study you're in. So if you're in pop, there's Friday masterclasses that take place. In other instruments, they tend to work on a different pattern. But if you'd like to know specifically about your instrument, I'd encourage you to ask later on with the specific head of school. We also have a whole range, I should say, of international chairs who are top level international performers who come in once or twice a term, as well as other international masterclasses. So they tend to be musicians who we have a little bit of a closer relationship. So they'll come in, 4 or 5 times a year, and they'll be across all instrument groups. So just pick a few names. If you're a violinist, we're Henning Kragerud. We have a very strong relationship. Who's an extraordinary and incredibly inspiring musician. Miklos Pereni, the extraordinary Hungarian cellist. I mentioned the pianist Jean Flambe Vuze, Stephen Huff, who we have a strong relationship, who actually studied at the RNCM, who comes in regularly. So I've only mentioned a few, but obviously across Wind Brass, all other groups as well, that we have regular master classes that are a really essential part of what we do. Julie is asking about opportunities for composers to have film music played live by ensembles to a film. So I'm not sure if that's referring, Julie, if you're a composer, or if you're just talking about other people's music. But so we do a number of projects with film. So we have opportunities for our own composers. Like I say, we have our brand new orchestra quite often does projects with film. So there's an opportunity, if you're interested in writing music that goes to screen, there's an opportunity for airing projects then, and also on that would be on an orchestral basis. We also have smaller scale projects that you can do to screen. We're very well set up, actually, because our concert hall and both our concert hall and our theatre are fully equipped with all the kit that you need to do that. So there's an awful lot of opportunities to do that. So, similarly, through our lab week, for example, there's opportunities to put forward project ideas that both composers and instrumentalists have done things to screen as well. So I hope that answers the specific question that you're asking. Oh yes, I just saw your note. You are a composer. Yeah. So I mean, I've touched on this quite a bit. Composition is an absolutely key, central part to our both obviously our training, but also our program. And if you look through, I'd encourage you, if you haven't yet, have a look through our brochure on our website. You can look through the past projects that we've done. And also there's quite a lot of videos. It'll give you a sense of the kind of things as a composer that you can do, and also the kind of composers that we bring in for our festivals. As I mentioned already, we partner very closely with the BBC Philharmonic on our composer festivals, which is it's great for both students and staff to have that relationship and to work with musicians who are sort of top of their game in terms of playing contemporary music. I'm going to just, I'm noticing we're going to draw to a close in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to pick 1 or 2 other questions. I know apologies, there's a huge amount of questions I probably haven't managed to get around to answering, but I'd encourage you, please do ask those questions of my colleagues. There'll be plenty of opportunity later on to come back to some of those detailed questions. I'm just going to pick 1 or 2 more, and then what I'll aim to do is just finish just before 10 o'clock, because I know there's other things going on that you may want to join in as well. So someone's asking a specific question about instrumental lessons. So to a certain extent, this slightly depends. I'm not entirely sure which instrument, but this depends on your instrument. Generally, one-to-one lessons are about an hour long. And also, depending on the instrument group, certain teachers work in classes as well. So you might have your actual one-to-one with primarily with your tutor, but then you'll have an opportunity to take part in a class, so whether that's a violin class or a cello class, and you'll have the opportunity to play with your peers, or similarly if you're a brass player as well. And those classes might take place longer, so it kind of depends from tutor to tutor, but generally as a sort of core thing, your one-to-one lesson would be in and around an hour long. I'm going to just choose, I'm going to choose one final question and then draw to a close. So Imogen is asking about pop music focal students. Are there chances to sing with big bands, jazz bands, etc., solo? So in terms of opportunities for pop vocal students, one of the main sort of big scale opportunities is through our session orchestra. And I know that there's opportunities, again, like I mentioned earlier, there's an audition process in terms of getting opportunities to stand up in front of the session orchestra, and that's a huge range of repertoire. We also, as well, are constantly creating new projects for our pop vocalists and other pop players as well to do in other contexts. So to answer in it sort of shortly, yes, there are very much opportunities. And as well, I'd echo that one of the things we're very open to, because the kind of groups we're creating are constantly changing, the kind of opportunities, and we're very open to working in collaboration with students to create new groups, new collaborative projects with different students across the program. So although we have these set groups like the session orchestra and the symphony orchestra that very much are sort of set to do certain types of music, we also are constantly creating new groups which have opportunities for both ensemble and solo singing. And there's a lot of opportunities as well through our composer festivals. For example, when we had Erilyn Wallen, I don't know if everybody's familiar with her. If you don't know her music, I'd encourage you to listen to it. It's amazing music, but she sort of straddles between classical and pop and contemporary. And we had some really wonderful performances as part of that, which was pop students actually singing some of her songs. So that's just one example of the sort of thing that we can do. So I'm going to draw to a close now. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody for joining me. And again, my apologies not to be able to answer all your questions. I've got a huge amount of questions here coming up, but please do ask them later on throughout the day. And we want to make sure that we get around to answering all your questions. And I just wanted to wish you all the very best. And I hope you have a really fantastic rest of the day today. So thank you and take care.